This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the scholar, savant, and general all-around excellent human, Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome.
Greetings,
Buck.
sir.
Welcome.
Greetings.
So we've talked about a lot of things. We have the electoral, I guess, season is behind us.
Yes, and I don't think that, now that the election is over, as we're taping this, I don't think we have anything we can figure out to talk about.
Well, we might talk about a few. There are a few things. There are a few subjects that might attract our attention, and there are lots to talk about. But maybe we could talk about the national debt. I mean, you've often mentioned this, and so have I, as an impending crisis for the country. And then we have this enormous expansion of the national debt under the Obama administration, has approximately doubled.
Yes.
You know, the number is some number like 17 trillion.
Oh,
or so.
you're behind the times. We're over 19 at this point.
$19 trillion, a very substantial increase in the national debt. And that debt increase in many ways sways the financial crisis of 2008 and enabled the country to continue its aggressive military policy in the Middle East. And it also in many ways participated in income transference. So many people had some money put in their tin cup, substantial tax cuts for some people. But the national debt has gone up enormously, and now we face a new administration that proposes to decrease taxes and increase spending, and an external observer would wonder, is the national debt going to skyrocket even more? And I'm sort of I'm getting ready to throw you the pitch here. So there is a limit to sustainability of the national debt, and you could get into a situation such as the one that exists in Greece today, where the government borrowed money, and the debt became unsustainable, and they were forced by their creditors to enormously decrease their living standards, et cetera, et cetera. Well, okay, so there's some dangers to arbitrarily increase the national debt. And do you think it's a crisis? Do you have any suggestions for President Trump? What are your comments on this time bomb?
Yes, well, where to begin? Yes, I definitely think it's a crisis. It's not one that hits like a lightning bolt. It's one that builds up over time like a glacier, or if you accept the global warming idea, we get to a point where it's not at a crisis, but it's going to be, and there's nothing you can do about it at that point. And if we have not reached that point, I think we're certainly at it. What else to begin? You've asked so many questions.
Well, I've tried to basically assert there's a crisis.
Yes.
And then what is the outcome of the crisis? How severe is the crisis? Is it a sustainable issue?
It's absolutely not sustainable. This is the thing that, I saw the latest Marvel hit Doctor Strange over the weekend. So to quote Doctor Strange, the debt comes due. That whenever you spend a dollar you don't have, you are taxing future generations. To pay for what the government owes, you either have to tax us today or tax us tomorrow. So someone will have to pay that $19 trillion, and if it's not us today, it will be us tomorrow. As to what Trump's going to do with it, I've seen our projections that we can look forward to several budget deficits for the next several years if we follow through on Trump's and the Republicans' plan. To that I reply, what else is new? That's what the continuing resolutions have been doing for us for the last several years. And there's no serious talk from anyone I've heard about paying the thing down. So it just keeps on going up. I suppose a couple of possibilities would be to try to renegotiate and discount the debt, as President-elect Trump once said, to the utter amazement and shock of everybody. I think that's just not in the offing. The other thing would be through continued quantitative easing to debase the value of the dollar so much that those of us who have a little money in the bank no longer find that it's worth anything. And that's the way that we end up where Greece is today.
Well, just to discuss this a little bit, I hate to embark on a foray into the dismal science of economics, but maybe I can direct your attention back to Economics 1, which I'm sure you imbibed long ago in some
back in the dark ages, yes.
place. But the idea of the Keynesian viewpoint was who was an economist in the 1930s, yes, who said the deal is the response of the world to the economic downturn of 1929 was to try and balance the budget, restrict trade, and get the national debt down, stay on gold standard, and actually the argument was made this made things worse. So classic Keynesian economics would be when things are bad, when there's a depression out there, you need to inject money into the system. So that's kind of the idea about the Keynesian economic theory. Oh, I mean, I'm being a little bit, maybe I'm not giving the ideas their due justice, but the idea of increasing the national debt, increasing spending, and so the economy revives and tax receipts come up. And then what supposedly should happen is in the times of prosperity, the debt should be paid down. So after the economy is racing along at 8% or whatever, then the government starts to run surpluses and pays the debt down, as in fact we had some surpluses actually back in the 1990s in the Clinton administration. And rather than aggressively do something, the money was promptly squandered, was
yes.
it not?
Well, yes, it was squandered in the form of having the government write $300 checks to every American under the first year of the Bush administration, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous.
Yes, yes. So
as I took my check and spent it.
So just to talk about this a little bit, if we have economists in the audience or someone sitting here discussing this, they could say, well, what you're really talking about is kind of flawed Keynesian economics in that in the prosperous times nothing ever happens. So imagine you're a politician, you're in doing something, you have a big position in political power, you have the voters out there, and your idea is to try and give those voters something. So you have to transfer money to them. And there are a couple of ways to transfer money. One is to tax people and send the money downstream. And that causes all kinds of difficulties. And if you tax them too much, you get sort of the Laffer curve problem. Yes. So that people just, if your tax rate is 95%, they're just not going to work. So right. There's a limit to the amount of money you can squeeze out of the system to pay your acolytes and constituents. The other thing to do that's quite painless is to borrow money. So that seems to be what is such an attractive thing to politicians. There are no particular limits on doing that. It's quite easy to do it, and it's been done for decades. The politicians are in power. They want to do some noble project. Maybe we'll build a road. Maybe we'll save benighted people in another country and go in with our soldiers and save them or do whatever.
Don't forget hot lunch for all school children.
Right, or a lot of things, and healthcare is part of this. We'll do this, we'll do that. And the public just doesn't seem to realize that's sort of what's going on here, and there's a limit to the largesse of the government. And I'm concerned where the largesse ends is if the interest rates start to click up, the amount of the tax receipts that are coming in that have to be used to amortize the debt, it becomes an insufferable situation. Yes. That's very alarming. Do you have comments about that? I mean, maybe we're just hitting the ping pong ball back and forth.
Yeah, I'd back up, and since you mentioned the Laffer curve, to make sure that everyone knows what that is. If the government taxes at a rate of 0%, there's no revenue. On the other hand, if the government taxes at a rate of 100%, there's also no revenue. Because if I'm not going to get to keep anything that I make, then I have no incentive to work. So where is the magic point on the curve to maximize the revenue? The Keynesians probably have one idea of that, and the trickle-down people have other ideas, and Congress probably doesn't care. The problem that you mentioned is it's very easy to give the American public things. They're very happy to get their $300 checks from the Bush administration or to have their children get their free hot lunch. It's very hard politically to make them pay for it. Nobody likes paying taxes. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. once said taxes are the price we pay for civilized society, but that still doesn't mean that we're happy writing the checks. And every time we spend a government dollar, someone's going to have to write a check for that. And once again, if it's not us, it's the next generation. It's either the next generation of workers or it's the next generation of politicians. And this is where the idea of kicking the can down the road comes. Well, let's go ahead and give people goodies now. Let's vote pork for our districts now. And then when that debt comes due, my successor will be in office. I'll be retired and have my wonderful government pension of $30 or $50 or $100,000 a year from Congress, and it will be my successor's problem. And good luck to him.
Oh, just so. And
so
now,
Keynes breaks down.
So I guess let's see. I guess we've tried to make the case that there's an argument to restrain the national debt and to be careful with it, the people that are causing the national debt are politicians that are catering to their constituents. And so right now we have a new president going in, and the stock market is up substantially, and there's at least a bit of euphoria in some circles, not all, many people have the opposite, but people are saying, wow, just look at this, a tax cut and new huge, roads and great big projects that are going to be wonderful, and new bridges, and there'll be jobs for everyone. Everyone will have a job. The unemployment rate will be less. All these great things will happen. Prosperity.
It sounds sort of like Reaganomics Plus, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, and that's right. Well, so the takeaway message is this is something that everyone should carefully consider, the amount of pain that's appropriate in, I guess, the economic world, and what does one do about that? Well, having made that statement, maybe we could go back to what could be done about the national debt, and some of the arguments that are being presented, I guess, by President Trump and some of his supporters and knowledgeable people around him, is that one way to basically take care of this is that the GNP goes up a lot.
Yes.
So it's sort of a Keynesian kind of comment. There is a sweet spot there, that if the government were to basically spend a lot of money on infrastructure improvements, the idea would be there would be a good investment. So no one, for instance, can easily build another highway into Atlanta. I mean, it's or put, shall we say, rapid transport. We're going to put trains that run in to the Atlanta airport from downtown Macon. You'll be there in 30 minutes.
Yes,
and all those things would presumably, that kind of investment presumably, would have a positive return on the GNP. You could also say that if you invested in education and that you made the citizens more productive and they learned more and they could do better things. So there can be a return on the investment that would make the GNP go up enough so it would take care of it. And the crucial ratio out there, I think some economists would say, would be the ratio of the national debt to the GNP. So it doesn't really matter, they would say, that if the national debt is 20 trillion, as long as the GNP is 200 trillion. So it's a percentage of the GNP is the important issue. So that would be a counter argument. Yes. And I would just raise this question: are the investments that are being thought about, is there any kind of numerical assessment of what lowering taxes and these investments as to what the rate of GNP increase and thus tax receipts would be as contrasted with not doing it? I mean, has anyone done that analysis?
I'm sure somebody must have. I would think that the flaw in the problem right now is that our current national debt, the ratio to the GDP is just off. Right now, I forget the percentages, but the national debt is far too great in proportion to the GDP that we've got, that if we diverted every dollar that every American made for the next 2 years, I think that would knock the national debt out, but that's clearly impossible to do. So once you get to a certain point, and that's not even including the amount that you mentioned that goes to service the debt that we've already got,
right, yes.
which is already up at what, 6-7%. I don't
Yes,
have my pie
right,
chart
right.
with me. So yes, in a perfect world, I think you're right. This infrastructure, interestingly, we're mentioning Keynes in the 30s. A great deal of this infrastructure dates from the 1930s. The WPA, the bridges and the roads that were built then, they are already at, and in some cases past, the end of their service lives. So this has got to be done. And if it's not done, then you're not just talking about reduced revenues or revenues that are not realized. You're talking bridge collapses, mass destruction, loss of life, and an erosion of the current trade that we've got going on. So that's got to be done. But if that's got to be done, something else is going to have to be either crossed off the list or funded with further loans or with further quantitative easing. So what goes?
Well, we could talk a little bit. I guess one of the things I'm pursuing in our conversation is that, okay, the national debt is bad, and then the politicians might say, well, there's a way I can fix this. I can take care of it. The issue that I see is in any kind of national discussion about this, there hasn't been an appropriate numerical assessment of what's going on. So, for instance, I was at least an acquaintance of mine who his job, he's one of the 18 people that basically bid on federal bonds, the federal paper, and it comes out at whatever, very low percentage.
Yes, yes.
And he, in my conversation with him, he said, you know what? If the 18 people in this room say, okay, we're going to require 2 or 4 or 6% for this paper, then that would pretty much destroy the country in a way. So one of the things that has to be considered is the access of money and buying the debt that the Treasury is issuing. And it's quite complicated. I don't pretend to get into it. But what I want to say is that one of the things going on right now is that the interest rates have increased substantially.
They have.
So one of the sequelae of this monetary expansion is an increase in interest rates. And another thing that knowledgeable financial people have to be on the lookout for is that if the interest rates increase enough on government debt, it will immediately have an extraordinary negative effect on everything. There won't be, it'll be a vicious cycle. So the government will say, I'm not going to tax you any more money. I'm going to issue $100 in new debt and I'll pay for everything. But the first time it works. The second time it's 10% interest on that $100. The next time 20, 40, 60, 80. So finally, issuing more debt, the interest rate consumes all the paper you could possibly pass out.
That's correct, and we have seen those T-bill rates go up since Trump was elected, and I'm hoping it just is reflecting the uncertainty. It may possibly reflect that cavalier attitude I opened up with about Trump saying he's going to renegotiate the debt, which once again nobody I know takes that seriously. It's in business perhaps, in government it's an entirely different thing.
Well, I'm concerned. So, I'm concerned there are no numbers that the public is getting on this discussion, which is going to be a big discussion in the next Congress, and how easy it is, how good it would be to be in Congress and to tell your constituency, well, I just lowered taxes. I mean, the champagne corks would pop, and then to say, well, guess what we're going to do in Macon, Georgia? We're putting in, you name it, the world's biggest airport, and we're going to put in a way to bring steamboats up the Okmulgee, and we'll put a new pleasure. We'll do all these things that would be, quite nice, I guess. Steamboats coming up. Yes. And everyone would say, well, this is great, but there's a cost to pay for this.
Yes. If we were starting from a blank slate, then it would be an entirely different thing. I'm put in mind of Henry Clay's American System, which was his idea of protectionism, of high tariffs, of the use of federal funds for internal improvements, canals, bridges, roads. Yes, if we were starting that without a $19 trillion debt, and even with a slight debt, if we had a $1 trillion national debt, or I'll even give you a $4 or $5 trillion national debt with a reasonable possibility of being repaid, I think things would be different. But now, simply to add on to it in the hopes that this is a gamble that pays off at a time when free trade has hemorrhaged American jobs. Ross Perot was right about his giant sucking sound 20 years ago. When China has taken a lot of our jobs, when the Far East has taken a lot of our jobs, and when mechanization, when robotics continue to take a lot of our jobs, are the high-end tech jobs going to pick up the slack? Can we reasonably hope that any investment that we make will show a big dividend 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And if we do see a big dividend from infrastructure improvements in 20 years' time, what will have happened to the national debt in ordinary course by that point?
Well, I was trying to make the comment or make the point that actually, well, infrastructure has some reasonableness attached to it as far as America.
Yes.
Well, there's some other things that might not. Another thing that seemed to would just be throwing money down the drain, so to speak, would be military excursions overseas. So if you look at what things cost in Iraq or the conflicts that have been in the Middle East, it is just millions and billions, and dare I say trillions of dollars have somewhat gone down the rat hole, if one wanted to say that.
Yes.
So the incursions in Iraq, and one could argue, well, they did good, and there's good things that happened from that, and there's some arguments along those lines, but the amount of capital expended in that is enormous, and one of the things that President Trump is talking about is the amount of money that the U.S. spends in its defense apparatus around the world to sort of be the world's policeman, and there's not any return on that investment. And then in a somewhat contradictory fashion, the idea is we're also going to increase our military budget. So we're going to like spend a lot more money with the hopes that people overseas are going to give us the money to do that. And I've had my doubts about that.
Yes, and once again, that latter part sounds vaguely Reagan-like. The idea that the traditional Republican, neocon Republican of making America great again would be big military spending. But once again, short of entitlements, which take up a huge chunk of the pie, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, now Obamacare, military spending takes up the next biggest slice of the pie. And our military budget is bigger than, the last time I checked, something like the next 19 states in the world, friend or foe, combined. We are essentially geared up and have been geared up to fight anybody, anywhere, at any time. And can we really afford to do this? And the answer is no. But we have made so many enemies in the years since World War II that if we just take our marbles and go home, are we not opening ourselves up to retaliatory attacks from the various enemies we've made?
And as we go through this, I mean, and other people might say, well, okay, I've said, well, all this money went down the rat hole, but maybe you've got to preserve your national identity, your borders. You've got to be able to, maybe there's some bad guys out there. There's certainly a lot of wickedness in the world. Maybe you have to have a strong military. But having said that, one of the things that happens is if the debt becomes so extraordinary, interest payments are so extraordinary, there's not enough money to really do all this. And I'll draw your attention to the different theories in the decline of the Roman Empire, and at least one of them is that the Roman tax system could not keep up with the military expenses, so they had the soldiers got large pensions. It was very expensive to keep them out there. The tax revenues it's hard to extract money, and the wars were expensive. And the reason the empire toppled was financially not being able to support the military, which is an issue out there.
Yes. Well, my libertarian friends and people in the Cato Institute, for instance, would argue that we fight the wars that we can afford. And if we cannot afford a war, we don't fight it. Now, if there's a case of national survival, for instance, World War I, and this is going back to one of the early things you said, this is where Keynesianism makes sense. We had to, unless Hitler's going to come over here and take us over, we had to go deeply in debt to fight that war. It was a question of national survival. And we did have a strong enough economy afterwards to pay that down. But can we afford that in the future? Once again, not starting from zero, but starting with a $20 trillion debt, because it will probably be $20 trillion very soon. Can we afford to continue this excursionism in the Middle East? Can we afford to keep troops in South Korea? Can we afford to irritate the Chinese in East Asia, in the South China Sea, in the Eastern Pacific as they are building their new artificial islands? Or are the cold-blooded economics of the situation going to force us to start pulling back from these high water marks?
Another way to say it is the Romans could not simultaneously fight in the 4th century. They couldn't fight the Persians and the Celts at the same time.
Yes.
3,000 miles. It was too much. They were just overextended. Well, you mentioned, which is sort of one of where the beef and the burger is, and that's entitlement. So we talked a little bit about expenditures for national defense and for infrastructure, ideas. But where the vast amount of money, well, and the other one is interest payments, the vast amount of money is going into the entitlements. And that's where, if you really wanted to do something, what you would do is you would diminish entitlements. Now, that would certainly, what politician would do that? What politician would do that? I mean, and people are very dependent on it. Another issue is these entitlements in some ways are producing social peace.
Yes.
So the argument could be made, just from a purely utilitarian Jeremy Bentham kind of deal, that if you said, all right, we're going to basically diminish Social Security payments, we're going to cut them in half, well, that would just cause riots in the streets, and the people couldn't get to work, they'd block the interstate, all kinds of negative things would happen. So there's, in many ways, the politicians' ability to diminish these entitlements, it's very difficult to do that.
Yes. Well, the thought experiment that I've posited a few times, probably on this show in the past, in my classes, I say let's cut all, regarding the viewing area of central Georgia here, Macon-Bibb County, Houston County, Warner-Robins, let's close Robins Air Force Base. Let's just close it and observe what happens to the central Georgia economy over the next 1 year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. All right, stage 2, let's keep Robins Air Force Base open, but let's remove every entitlement check, every Social Security check, every Medicare check, every Medicaid check, any sort of government entitlement check that gets written to residents of central Georgia for that same time. In either direction, just leaving aside the political chaos of the latter, the economic chaos, it's just horrifying.
It's a very difficult.
We're addicted.
Yes, and we could talk briefly about we can make things more efficient. I mean, and from the point of view of health care, maybe there are things that we can do. The other thing that I think should be considered would be, I know this might not be a popular idea, but extending the working age. People have discussed that. People's life expectancies have increased so much. So it used to be Bismarck put it at 65.
80% of the population dead at 65.
Well, I'll trick everyone. They'll all be dead at 65. Sure, I'll give you a pension. I know you won't be alive to take it. But in fact, people are alive, and there are ideas out there. And different commissions have brought this before politicians, and I hope the national dialogue that's taking place in the new administration, we're going to consider some of these limitations on the largesse of the government.
Yes, unfortunately, they're politicians, so you never know. It's too easy to kick that can.
Well, it's been nice having you with us tonight, Bucky, and we'll talk some more. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.